dead clicker. I'm heading forward. Oops, there I go. Okay, we're good now. Okay. Thank you, Jill, for that introduction. I'm just basically going to give us kind of an overview of where we're headed and then turn it over to Todd. Actually, where I wanted to start it is not where we have the slide, but just to give you a bigger picture of where this fits into the EDRM model. We talk about the collection of electronically stored data in terms of the EDRM model, and we start with information management, identification, preservation, collection, processing, analysis, review, production, and then finally with presentation. So we are now at the collection stage, really. This is where forensics is inserted and the collection phase happens. So this kicks off perhaps some of the first interactions you have with your client, getting their data, helping them to get their data before you go through the rest of the model, what to do with that data then. So as Todd will talk about, this is a really important step that a lot of importance can be attached to it because of the integrity of it has to really be thoroughly examined, because down the chain then anything that may go awry or can be perhaps related to how the data was collected. So that's why part of the focus is on this stage. So we're going to look at forensics define, the science, the people, and the methods involved. Then forensics is a process too. It's not just a definition, but a process, the acquisition, identification, evaluation, and presentation. And that kind of outlines where we're headed. Just to give you a definition of forensics, you guys probably know this, but as you can see, a characteristic of evidence that satisfies its suitability for admission as fact and its ability to persuade based upon proof or high statistical confidence. The aim of forensic science is to demonstrate how digital evidence can be used to reconstruct a crime or incident, identify suspects, apprehend the guilty, defend the innocent, and understand criminal motivations. So we have a definition. We know where we're headed. And then finally, who uses computer forensics? And you find this is used on all different avenues, not just, I assume you guys are mostly look at it in terms of civil litigation, but in other avenues of not just the legal world, but the general world. So criminal prosecutors rely on evidence obtained from a computer to prosecute suspects. Civil litigants, as we just spoke of, personal and business data discovered on a computer can be used in fraud, divorce, harassment, discrimination cases, or really, it's been my experience, most any case. Insurance companies, the evidence is discovered on a computer can be used to mollify costs, fraud, workers' compensation, arson, et cetera. Private corporations are interested in this. They obtain evidence from employee computers can be used as evidence in harassment, fraud, embezzlement cases. We've had cases where they think that a corporation thinks that one of their employees is perhaps doing something on a computer that is not suitable to be doing at work. You could see it in that avenue as well. Law enforcement officials obviously rely on computer forensics to back up search warrants, post-seizure handling, and individual private citizens obtain the services of professional computer forensics specialists to support the claims of harassment, abuse, or wrongful termination from employment. So we see it in a wide spectrum of uses, many people needing to have this kind of information, have a forensic collection done. And with that, I will turn it over to Todd to delve more deeply into these subjects. And I appreciate your attention, and we'll be back.
Got it. Emma. Thank you. Hello, everybody. So we're going to go ahead and continue on with the forensics a little bit. Now, to keep in mind, as we're talking about this, we're also going to start talking a little bit about mobile devices, the things in the cloud, some of the things that have become more interesting in the last couple of years, and talk about that. What we're going to do is cover a little bit of the general forensics and then narrow down to those particular things and explain why they're a little different than traditional forensics. But let's talk about collections. We call it collections done 3 ways, right? Do-it-yourself data collection, the idea that a corporation can go and collect their own data. It's probably, in the corporation's mind, the cheapest way to do it, but as you guys probably have guessed, it's probably one of the most difficult things to defend. The next is an IT on-site collection, meaning that you're sending somebody internally to do the collection from the IT department. So the do-it-yourself is more like the business unit doing it, and believe it or not, individuals still do that. IT on-site is the IT people in the corporation do it. And the last is the forensics way of doing it, which is third-party, making sure everything's verified and authenticated. And there's really 3 ways you do that. The provider travels to the collection site. That's obviously the most expensive way. Provider National Forensic Network collects, meaning that you're not traveling to the network, to the corporation. You have individuals in the local area, and you manage those local resources to get somebody on site. And then we can also send special devices for the provider to send for imaging, so that you pick it up, gather it with no individual being in place. To talk a little bit about this, those things all work in traditional settings. The problem with mobile devices is they're not easily collected that way. None of the devices that currently exist allow for the ability to just have somebody else plug in a mobile phone, collect it, and gather the data. The tools just aren't there yet, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But you really need to think about, when you're dealing with mobile devices, one, the biggest thing is we just did this. We did a 50 custodian collection in a corporation. We went there that day. All the machines were ready for us, and then we asked for the mobile phones, and guess what? They were all with the individuals who had left for the day because their machines were going to be used, so they were traveling, and they took their mobile devices with them. So you have to make sure that when you say you're coming to collect devices, that you make sure they understand that sometimes the device you're collecting is the device they have on them, and that it has to be there. So there's really 4 processes that we're talking about, whether it's the cloud, mobile devices, or traditional. The first is the ability to acquire that data, to be able to go in, gather the information, collect it, and pool it. The second is the identification of data. What I mean by that is, from the device, what is it that you want to identify and figure out that you want? In traditional computers, you would grab, the entire C drive, you'd grab My Documents folder, you might grab the program files, things like that. On a mobile phone, none of those exist, right? So on a mobile phone, the identification might be SMS messages, text messages. It might be images or photographs. It might be transaction logs, knowing when calls came and went. But things that some individuals don't understand, when there is email on a mobile device and there's a document attached to it, if it, for example, a BlackBerry, that document doesn't exist on the phone. It's always going back to the server to grab it. So when you collect that phone, that document doesn't come with it. So it's something to keep in mind and keep thinking about as you talk about mobile phones, is where is the data actually residing? And then evaluation is really now looking at forensic analysis on the phone, talking about it, what can you gather from it, and then obviously presentation. How are you going to present what you found to individuals who may not be forensic experts and make them understand what you're talking about? And so I laid it out into 4 steps, and then I just threw the slide up to make you understand a little bit about the complexity of forensics, right? All those steps have 5 or 6 different steps related to them, and it's something just to keep in mind. We don't need to cover these steps, except to say that you have to think about each of these things as you're moving through collections. So let's talk a little bit about acquisition. So why are you acquiring evidence? Most of the time it's for intellectual property, unauthorized activity, different reconstruction of events, things like that. In the old days, it was one computer and a server. You gathered from those 2 areas, and you had everything you need. Today, probably 90% of what you want to collect doesn't exist on either one of those devices, because individuals are talking via email on their mobile phones. Most of the corporations are moving to cloud-based solutions to handle their email archiving, for example. So when you're looking for what to collect, you got to ask questions. I'll give you an example. We had a client about 2 or 3 months ago. We asked them to tell us everything they had within their corporation that we needed to collect. They went through the whole thing. They explained everything. And then one of my forensic analysts got there and asked the question, well, what's not in your network that's business related? Oh, we have this email archive. It's in London. It's not here, but that doesn't count. Well, what is it? Well, it's all email prior to 2010 is archived to a company called Mimecast, and that's where it is. Well, that's responsive. You have to deal with it. You can't just ignore it because it's somewhere else. And then we had another fun issue with that. It was an American company that had decided to use this archive, and they put it in London. Anybody know what the problem with that is now? It's privacy laws. The problem is the EU has data privacy laws. As soon as they stored it in London, it required us to go to the courts in London to free that data to give it back to us. So you have to keep in mind what's happening as we become more global is that companies are choosing to pick archive solutions that aren't in the United States. Except for our country, 2 states, Massachusetts and California, are close, but in the EU, when you guys create an email here at Jackson Kelly, who owns the email in the United States? Jackson Kelly, right? Who owns it in the EU? You do. You do. Even though it's company email going back and forth, that is your private communication, even though you're doing it on behalf of the company. That means anything that you try to collect that goes outside the United States is subject to EU privacy laws. Now Asia has privacy laws as well, and even Brazil, which is actually becoming one of the worst, has major privacy laws that says I need written authorization from the individual to release that document. If I'm doing criminal activity, am I going to give you that authorization? Probably not, right? So there's whole things that are involved in that. Some of the stuff I'm going to show you today, the slides are more technical than what I'm going to cover because I wanted to be able to leave this behind. But I think it's important that you guys hear some of these terms because as you talk to forensics people, they're going to use these terms and you need to understand what they are. So a logical acquisition, what does that mean? It would be the equivalent of thinking about it that you're going to copy off a computer what you can see. So you can see the folders, you can see the files. If you wanted to as an individual, you could walk up, open the file, and see it. When somebody says logical acquisition, that's what they mean. The physical acquisition means that I'm collecting everything about the file system. So here's a question, does anybody know the answer to this question? If you delete a file today on an average size computer desktop, how long is it on the computer before it goes away? How many? Anybody else have another guess? The average time is 11 years. Okay? Because what happens is that file only gets deleted when it's written over. And the problem is we all decided we really like these really big hard drives and we only have this much data on them. That means that until that rest of that space fills, the deleted items stay. The important thing is that the things you can see, especially if you're doing a criminal investigation, are usually not the documents you want because they knew you were coming. It's going to be on that other space. The other thing I love is when you're doing a deposition, they're like, I deleted that 3 years ago. There's no way you're going to get that back. Well, guess what? Most forensic analysts can get back up to 11 years worth of data if really need to in new machines. And then there's something called volatile memory acquisition. This means memory that if the computer wasn't turned off, still exists. A lot of you guys would think about it this way. I create a document in Word and I don't save it. I hit the button and it closes and you don't save it. Is that document there? It absolutely is. It actually stores in the memory of the computer for a period of time. Not very long. When you restart the computer, it goes away. But it is there. So if a forensic analyst comes in behind and you haven't turned off your machine, I can get that document you didn't save. Okay? The other place volatile memory exists, which most people don't think of, is copiers, printers, things like that. When you print a document to a printer, it stays in the volatile memory of the printer for a period of time. Depending on the printer, it can be anywhere from an hour or two to 5 or 6 weeks. So you can actually grab documents off the memory of a printer as well. So you want to think about handling of evidence. I always give the example when I'm talking to lawyers about collection. How many of you, when you've gotten email data collected, how many of you guys throw it into Outlook, open it up inside your Outlook, and take a look at it? I know you do, right? All right, if I take up this and I tell you this is evidence and I just touched it and I put it down, what should you do with that if you want to get my information off of there? You should seal it, pack it, make sure my fingerprints are all over it, and then you're not going to do it. So if I said to you, come up here and touch this, as a lawyer you would say, no way, I'm not touching that. My fingerprints are going to be all over it. Except every one of you opens email exactly like that. You open it as if you don't care that the fingerprints are all over the evidence. You got to be careful when you're collecting data and looking at data that you're working on a copy of the data and that there's an original that isn't touched, and that you don't affect anything. Well, it doesn't matter. I'm just opening the email and I'm closing the email. I'm not touching it. I'm not saving it. All right, tell me the last time this file was accessed. Oh, that would be today when you touched it, right? Tell me the last time it was printed. Oh, when you open an email, it actually gets rid of that printed thing because you opened and closed it. It's an Outlook feature, but it goes away. So you've messed metadata up there. So you got to be careful when you're handling evidence that it's more difficult. Here's the one I really love, mobile phones. Let's turn on the mobile phone and see what's on it. Everything can go away on the mobile phone by doing that. Because when mobile phones start up, some of them automatically clear their memory, reset everything. Why did they do that? Because human beings want their phones to work as fast as possible and keep their battery life as much as possible. So everything clears when you open up, but if you had plugged it into a forensic device first, you would have collected all this information about the mobile phone. And then the next famous one. I need to get into somebody's Gmail account. They've been really nice to me. They gave me their username and password, and I'm going to log in and see what they have in their Gmail. You've now destroyed all evidence in Gmail by doing that. You have to collect it in a certain way in order to get that information. I'm not going to cover all this. It just shows you a little bit about what's involved in doing a collection. And notice it does not matter whether this is on a regular computer, mobile phone. You would just change some of the wording. But look at all the things that have to be done by a forensic analyst to do it correctly. You got to shut down the computer after you've hooked up. If the computer's off, you don't turn it on. You have to document every piece of the data. What's the serial number? What kind of hard drive? What condition is it in? Why do we have to do that? Because a forensic analyst goes to turn the machine on and it fails. Or it turns on and deletes everything because the guy put a Trojan horse on the thing to get rid of everything. Everything has to be documented. You need to make sure you have keywords. You have to look at files. There's something in here called a Windows swap file. You don't care what that is, except you're never going to be able to look at it, but it holds everything about the printing, the devices, all the information. If you turn on the machine and turn it off, that swap file can clear, depending on what timing is involved. The same swap file exists on the mobile phone that we talked about earlier. So now let's talk about the identification of evidence. We've acquired the data, we pulled it up in a bunch of different ways. Where can the document reside? So I'm going to tell you guys something about this diagram. This diagram was created somewhere in 2001, and I still use it today because it was on a 2-month project that we worked on where we had to identify a single document in a network environment and where it might exist that we need to go collect it from. It's a little small on the screen, and I apologize for that, but the idea behind this is it is everywhere. Printers, copiers, mobile phones, the cloud, backup servers, home computers, email servers, cloud. It can be anywhere. But the interesting thing about this is I always put this up because this was 2001. It's now 2013. You just take that whole screen and double it because everywhere it existed here in 2001 now exists identically in the cloud, right? So there's a whole nother infinity of what can be caught and collected. So here's where you can collect from. Laptops and desktops, that's pretty straightforward. Servers, contrary to most people's belief, I can't go in and collect a whole email server. I can pull the whole thing. Most of the time you're going to do what they call logical acquisition. You're going to go get information from the server so that you're not collecting everything. Removable hard drives. This is the one I love the most. Removable hard drives, people forget to ask about them, and people use removable hard drives all the time. You got little flash drives now. Some of you have it on your key ring. Your clients have all the same things. The other thing that individuals don't know about those removable hard drives, and we've caught more people than not on this, I plug it in the day before I'm fired because I know I'm about to be fired, and I copy a whole bunch of documents onto a hard drive, and I take it away, and I get rid of it, or I take it with me, and I go to the next job. And when I get to the next job, I take that same USB drive and I plug it into my new computer and I copy all my documents back, and now I have an intellectual property case on my hands. Guess what? As a forensic analyst, I can tell you which hard drive was plugged into that machine, and that same hard drive was copied into that machine, and the number of files that came off of this one that ended up on that one. And I don't need the drive to do that. Your computer in your office, every time you plug something into it, records the device, its serial number, its media ID, all this information about the hard drive. I can even tell you the brand that you plugged in. That can all be collected without having the drive itself. So I can prove to a judge that someone plugged something in, copied 17 files, went to his new company, copied 17 files back, and the ID of the two drives match. I may not actually be able to prove totally which files were there, but wow, that's really damning evidence if we want to use it, right? Backup tapes. Backup tape collection is an unusual place. Jill mentioned earlier unusual places. In the past, what did you guys do with backup tapes? You said, whoa, Judge, that's beyond reasonable. We can't get to backup tapes. I'm not even going to submit them to the court because it's unreasonable and burdensome. It's starting to go away. There's indexing software now that can index that tape very quickly and tell you what was on the tape so that you can see it. And the judges will say, you got to at least index it. You got to run the index and tell me what's on it, and then reasonably tell me that you don't see anything on there that's reasonable to your case. If you do, you must produce. This year, we're seeing probably 30% of individuals not being able to win that argument. Compared to last year, it was about 10%, and I expect by next year it'll be 50% will not win that argument because it's in backup tape, because the technology has caught up to be able to do that in a way that's not burdensome. Mobile devices. Not all mobile devices are created equal. When somebody asks you what iPhone they have, or what phone they have, and they say an iPhone, ask the next question, which is, which iPhone is it? Is it a 3? Is it a 4? Is it a 5? Is it the S? Is it the C? Is it the next generation? Whatever it is. And that's true every device, because guess what? If it's an iPhone 5, I can't get information off of it yet. Nobody's hacked it yet. No forensic expert has hacked 5, right? So when they pull data, they can only pull data that's live to the system. The other stuff is not available yet because Apple, correctly, is building a device that's more and more secure for you. The problem is the more secure they make it, the less I can get out of it. 4 and below, no problem. We can get anything you want because we now have the crack codes for everything related to those phones. As new versions come out, you have to watch that. Samsung's are the other one now. Their Pad has no unlock codes as of right now. I expect by the end of the year somebody will figure that out and be able to do that. But just keep in mind, you need to know what device they have. Obviously, the older it is, the more we can get off of it from the standpoint of getting in. But that's something to keep in mind. Home computers. Home computers used to be kind of this void that said, hey, if it's on the home computer, the judge will let me not go collect it. Except if it has the ability to VPN in or connect to the network from outside, if it's used for a reasonable amount of business, it is now admissible and can be used. So there's 2 reasons you want to know that. As a lawyer, you want to know that it might need to be collected, and as a person, you need to know, you might want to make sure that you're doing homework stuff within a Citrix server or something like that, because once your home computer has it, it can be admissible now. Social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, everybody's using these today. Anybody answer how much of the information that people enter into Facebook from the time they sign in till today, how much of the information is in Facebook right now today? Who said that? All of it. Every single piece of information that has ever gone into Facebook still exists today. All right? The only thing Facebook does for users is hide the view of that data. So you have the timeline. And a lot of people didn't realize this until Facebook came out with the timeline. And all of a sudden the timeline came out and they were like, oh, this is really cool. I can see everything. And then they realized that very first entry says, logged into Facebook for the first time on this year. And everybody freaked out because they realized now even things they deleted showed up on the timeline. Then Facebook scrambled and made all the views right for the timeline in a matter of a week to make it all go away again and only leave certain events. But that means, guess what? As a collections person, we love Facebook, right? Because no matter what they do, we can most likely get any information off of it. Same with Twitter, same with LinkedIn. These are what they call ongoing repositories. They don't ever delete data even if you delete it. I put the cloud up here because the cloud is more than just social media. Some people mix it together. They see the cloud and social media as the same thing. Social media is only one aspect of the cloud. Anything that is stored on a system that's not in the primary location is considered the cloud. All right? So when somebody says I've stored in the cloud, it could be a hard drive sitting on somebody's machine in a colo somewhere. That's the cloud. Now, everybody talks about it as if it's this mysterious thing. I even had a client at the beginning of the year ask me how they plugged in a cloud. And no joke, they asked that question. All right, and I had to explain, it's just computers somewhere else other than here. And then I always put copiers and scanners because I've had, just in my experience, when I was at a law firm previously, this was the only place the document existed. It had been deleted off the network. It had been deleted off the hard drive. They'd even used the DoD wipe drive to get off of that. And I went to the copier and said, print. Give me everything that was printed. And they, before they deleted it, they printed everything so they had a paper copy that would never be found. You got to remember that you can get data off that information as well. So this is a little bit about, I talked about it, I just want to put it up, mobile devices. The manufacturer, the model, and the operating system all matter when you're collecting. The deliverable is not data most of the time. The deliverable is not like a hard drive where you copied a Word document out and provided it up and it's in a review platform. It is usually a forensic report that says, here's all your text messages, this is how many there were, the text messages are in there, but there's not a single separate document for the text message. There's not a separate document for the email, for example. It may just give you a report. A lot of the phones don't give data, which throws lawyers today because they're so used to being able to review a document. A lot of the forensic collection of a phone will never, ever be in a form of data where you look at it in a review platform. So you have to rely heavily on a forensic report to confirm that an email was there, that a text message was there, and that's something to keep in mind. The data that is mostly available on phones, email, text messages, GPS data, we'll come back to that in a second, pictures, which are kind of obvious, and any files they've actually chosen to store on the mobile phone can be collected. There's not as much capability to pull off application data off a mobile phone, like when they open and close applications. One, because most of us don't know this, but when you open it on an iPhone or even Samsung, and you open an app, and you go on to another app and you close it, the app doesn't ever actually close. It stays in the background. There are a few people that know how to close it, but it's hard to do. The number one thing that we get from these reports that has been useful, GPS data. Everybody loves the location services because, man, I can go to Google Maps, I can have it tell me where to go, and it puts a little dot on the map. I get to follow it around and help. As soon as you turn the location services, even when you're not using those applications, I know everywhere you went for the rest of your life. Okay? So from the day the phone is on to the day it leaves, the GPS data is so small that it can track almost a lifetime worth of locations. So I can go find exactly where somebody went and where they were. So here's collections from the cloud. I put a lot of things in here, webmail, social media, different cloud apps. I think you guys will recognize some of these. Facebook, obviously LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Gmail, Salesforce.com. Which is huge. We just did a case with Salesforce.com where we were trying to collect information about sales individuals who had laptops all over the world, and we needed to prove where they were. We couldn't find it anywhere else. Well, when they plugged the laptop into Salesforce and loaded it, they have this great locator thing that tracks where they were so they can put in information so they don't have to do it. That tracking information in Salesforce allowed us to tell where individuals were. The cloud is ever growing. And I would argue that at some point, probably 5 to 6 years from now, the cloud will be the primary location that you're going to get data, not the secondary location. Most corporations that we're working with today are moving all of their exchange, their documents out into the cloud to let somebody else manage. All right, so I'm going to get a little techie on you because, we need to, when you're talking about any of these things, people are going to talk languages, and I always say I'm a translator of languages. I translate from lawyer to tech all the time, right? Allocated space. What allocated space is live data, but for those of you who don't know, remember I talked about those drives that are really big? Every file takes up a block of space. But if the file is smaller than that block on a computer, that extra block is empty and can be used to store deleted items. So even if you look at a drive that's 100 gigs and it says 100 gigs has been filled with data, there's still data that's deleted in there because the computer never fills a whole block inside itself. And so that's allocated space. It means we are allowed to track everything inside of it, and it loads in that set. The empty space at the end of each of those clusters is what people call slack space. You'll hear forensic people say slack space because they love it. It's the space where they can go find stuff that nobody else can find. Unallocated space is the stuff that's not assigned to anything. It's totally not unallocated. They would be part of the physical exam, but not part of the logical one. So we went to collect all the data. We would never get that unallocated space. And then fragments is something in unallocated space that exists. One of the biggest challenges that we have when we do forensics work versus straight discovery work is we get a whole bunch of files that match keywords. And then we load them up into the review platform, and it's all gobbledygook. It looks like language you don't understand because there's 5 of the keywords in there, and it doesn't look, and we get the call from the attorney that says, my God, you did something wrong. You processed it incorrect. It's wrong. The data's not there, blah, blah, blah. It's not that. That's all that was there of the document. When the document started to get written over, remember I told you the drive will get written over? Well, let's say it writes over half of it. The other half stays, and forensics people can pull that fragment and show it to you so that you have a part of the document. So when you see things like that, that's most likely what you're seeing is some deleted item that was half deleted. And you'll have a fragment that has a keyword. And don't negate those. Some of the best evidence has come from half of a deleted file. There's the slack space we were talking about. It's just the area that nobody touches. It always is there. It stores information that you might gather. Everybody kind of knows what metadata is today, right? Metadata is data about data. Think properties. If you were to right-click on a document, do properties, it'll tell you all about the document. For forensics purposes, this is all the type of information, and I only gave you the top 7. I think the last count, there's 3,000 different files that you can grab or information about a file, about a document. But these are the most common. You want to know who the author was, what computer it was on. The newest thing is what they call EXIFs. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but when you take a photograph on your iPhone or any camera now that's digital, it tracks not only your photo, who took it, what date, what time, what location, and what camera you used to take the photo, and a whole bunch of other lists. I think at this point there's somewhere around 130 different pieces of information it collects. So in a case that we did, 2 individuals said they had never met, and miraculously 2 of their photos were taken on the exact same day, the exact same location, and we were able to tie those together. Wow, you never met and you were standing in the exact same location, and you both took a beautiful photo for your families because you were there, right? An innocent photo, no problem with the crime, except I found that you were standing next to each other. So things like that become really handy in collection. You'll hear forensic experts talk about data carving. Data carving is about those fragments. It's about the ability to go in and get information that was deleted and slice off the pieces and still get you something that's readable, like the header and footer, like you know that a Word document was on the phone. You may not know what's in it, but I'll be able to tell you that there was a Word document there and on what date. That might give you enough to go ask more questions. The other examples of custom carvers that forensic people are building today, all related to social media. That Facebook, I can get so far with forensic tools, traditional forensic tools, and pull down Facebook. I want to go all the way back to the beginning and not have to go ask a subpoena from Facebook. There are people that are writing code for forensic tools today that are going to be able to do that without having to go ask Facebook to get that information. Facebook's not real happy about it. Gmail, Yahoo, obviously, because before they could just say, hey, public domain, it's not my problem. I'm not a publisher. I don't have any right. I don't need to give it to you. Fine. And if you're just a public publisher, we'll write script to write all the way into that. So there are things that we can do from that perspective. Some things I think about social media. There are always more than one door. What I mean by that is I don't have the Facebook login and password of an individual. So I think I can't get to their Facebook account. But in Facebook, they've decided to let everybody and their brother be able to see everything they write. Once they've done that, that's effectively public access. So if you can get somebody else to give their login and password, you can go from that login back into the other Facebook account. So evaluation of evidence. A couple things to think about from this standpoint. And this is kind of something that's important to me. I came up from a firm in D.C., now Hollingsworth LLP, used to be Spriggs and Hollingsworth. They were famous for the Daubert challenges, especially in pharmaceutical products. But Daubert is actually across anything. And what you're going to find, both interestingly enough, is that both plaintiffs and defendants are now using this challenge for forensic evidence. The Daubert challenge used to be a great defense debate. You can't scientifically prove that this is linked to this. The plaintiff's bar has learned to say, well, you can't prove that the collection you did actually pulled the information, and this is this and this and this and this. If you use a true forensic analyst, they can lay it down all the way down, show you the trail. So it allows you to use that legal argument. Kumho Tyer also took Daubert a little step further and argued that the criteria had to be not only did all that evidence exist, but you had to have somebody with technical knowledge that had done the work so that they could be put on the stand as an expert. So when we talk about evaluation, we're really talking about forensic analysis. Now, this is one thing I want to very clearly define. When you ask someone to do forensics, you got to ask one more question, which is it forensics collection or forensic analysis? Collection is, hi, go get the data, pop it onto a special drive, and that's usually on a per device or per hour standpoint. Analysis is actually where you want all the information to be gathered about those deleted files, carving out. That's usually on an hourly basis and the more expensive component of forensics. So I've seen this, and sometimes even I forget. You talk to an individual about the price of collection, and they say, yeah, we're going to want this data. You give them a price because you don't know what the analysis is going to cost. So you give them a price at the bottom that says forensic analysis, whatever it is, $300 an hour. That's going to be forensic analysis to be determined. How much is it going to cost me to do forensics? Oh, well, right now it's going to cost you $4,000. Great, $4,000. And then it turns into $10,000 because a lot of hours were spent doing forensic analysis. So you want to make sure to ask what the cost is. I'm going to tell you, if you ask me and I don't know anything about the case or what's done, I can't give you an exact number, but I can say on average, you know, if I have a 100 gig drive, it's probably going to take a couple days worth of analysis to find exactly what you want. Oh, one other thing. Forensic analysis only works if you do that physical acquisition. If you do logical acquisition, I can get some of the information, but all I'm doing is getting the live information. I'm not getting that USB information about what was connected, deleted files I'm not getting. So when individuals go and say, well, I don't know if this case, it really warrants a forensic image. I've heard that now over the last 8 months a lot. So you're telling me that 8 months from now, when the judge stands up and says, I want to know this, and you've only done a logical collection, you're going to be comfortable with that? It costs about $300 a drive to forensically image a drive. If they come back to you 6 months later, I can get you anything you want off that drive. But if all you do is go collect a logical image and let that custodian continue to do their work, all that data is going away. Here's some types of forensic analysis. Let's determine if any scrubbing software has been used. Oh, I accidentally deleted it. It wasn't my fault. Oh, but it's interesting because you ran a scrubbing software that's DoD Wipe 7 certified that guaranteed that everything went away. You'd want to know that. Identify web access by the device. I can tell you your whole internet history most of the time off of the web and where you went, and what you looked at, what things you downloaded, who you logged in as, all of that stuff. We had a case in a divorce case where the husband said that he didn't know anything about something about his wife. Well, come to find out, on his computer, he was logging in as his wife, to see what she was up to on a regular, consistent basis. We were able to prove that. Determine if the USB device is connected. We talked about that. Look at certain named files. Were they opened? Were they closed? And then look for recovered deleted files and file fragments. Also look for things that have changed. I can look and see that 3 days ago somebody accessed a file and today they accessed it at a different time. There are ways with forensic tools, depending on how the data works, that I can grab all kinds of information about a file, the history, when it changed, when it was created, when it was modified. Okay, keyword hits in forensic tools. The reason I always put this slide in here is really important. Attorneys have become really good at searches inside of review platforms. And so it's good. I mean, I like it. As a technologist, 10 years ago, I was having debates where I was doing all that work, right? You guys have become really good at being able to do keyword hits. And then you ask the same keyword hits for a forensics guy, and you get all this stuff back that's like, well, I don't want any of that. I don't need that. I don't need this. What is this? This is all crap. Remember that internet cache, that unallocated space, that Slack space? When you ask a forensics person without an e-discovery expert on top of them, hey, I need you to go run these hits and pull everything that matches these hits, they're not thinking like you. They're thinking like a technical person. They're pulling everything that matches the hit, including all the deleted files, the file fragments, the internet history, all those carved items that we pull out. So you're going to get somewhere around 30% of data that you can't read. It comes out of all kinds of different places. So you want to collect it, you want to know it, but be aware that you're going to get a lot of hits that don't come in common files. And so you might say to a forensic analyst, do that for me, mark the hits, give me a report on all of those. But then only give me what they call user-generated content. It means a human being created it. Word documents, spreadsheets, PDF, email, things that we as humans create, give me those. I don't want the file fragments yet. I don't want things out of the page file of a computer because that's going to be a lot of stuff I want later maybe. But right now I want to see what documents exist. Because 90% of the time when you guys are talking about keyword hits, you really just want the documents that match those hits, not everything that's on the computer. In criminal cases, you probably want everything. In corporate civil cases, you probably more likely just want documents. So when you ask for keyword hits, you should make them run it against everything, give you a report on that, but only give you user-generated files. So now the presentation of evidence. I know this is small. I can't give you the full report, and I kind of blurred it on purpose. But the idea behind this report, remember I told you mobile phones don't have documents. They just give you reports. The reports will look something like this. They'll give you bullet points. Here's text messages. There were 7 text messages. Hey, here's the date and time and the text of the data. The information on the right is when was the phone used, what kind of US connectors were connected. Did it connect to a computer? Because remember, we all charge our phones also by plugging that USB into a computer. Remember what happens to the computer? It records that that mobile device was hooked to that computer. It's a device just like anything else. That report will tell you what computers it attached to. A little different than the removal drive. It works both ways. So keep that in mind. But that's all you're going to get a lot of times from mobile devices. I talked about that. The initial inspection report, we're going to go ahead and show this as a PDF. But the initial inspection report, a lot of forensics people, when they're on site, and if you're with them, this will drive you crazy, right? You say, hey, I need to collect these 8 drives. And you're like, I need you to do the drive, I need you to do the drive, great. And all of a sudden, the forensics person isn't doing anything with the drive. He's filling out this weird report. And you're like, what are you doing? He's required by the courts to record the item. Can we pull that out in any way? Oh, there. All right, that's okay. We can work with it. That's okay. So the idea behind this, it tracks everything. I need to know the make, the model, the color of the machine. I need to know whether it has a floppy drive, a CD, a USB, a hard drive, serial number, the capacity, what kind of cards it has in it. That's required to be collected before collection even starts. There's a couple reasons for this. One, we need to be able to, in the court, say that I can guarantee you that was the machine I was sitting at. And number 2 is when more often than not, especially, I find this a lot in bankruptcy cases, and it'll make sense. You go to turn on a computer, do a forensics thing, and the computer won't turn on. And of course, whose fault is that? It's the forensic analyst's fault because, this machine worked perfectly fine until you touched it. Well, by doing this inspection report, we can do some tests like, is the BIOS working? Is the ability to boot the computer to turn it on, is that working? We do that all before we do anything else to the computer, so we can say, it wasn't working before I even started. But, by the way, I still got your data off of there, right? Most forensics things you'll see in our small print too, we're not responsible for the computer working or not working when we leave. You need to explain that to your clients that we are going to do everything in our power to put forensic tools against it, but because we do this inspection report, if the machine doesn't start, doesn't fix, whatever, most forensics people will not be responsible for that. It's not their problem, and they'll probably be able to document that it wasn't working when they got there. Now, that said, there will be individuals in our company that will try good effort to try and get it back booting up if we think it might be something that was done. But most of the time, why don't I want to touch that? Because I have to prove that I only did forensically what I was supposed to do. If I start troubleshooting the machine, I'm now affecting the metadata of that machine. We can't allow that to happen. Go ahead and scroll down on that document. You'll see here the boot order, the system date, some of the things called a partition. Some of you may or may not know this, but in a computer, you have one hard drive, but you might have what's called partitions. So it means that you have a 600 gig drive, you only see 400 of it when you open and boot it up. There's usually another drive partition there. It might come from, like Dell does it automatically. How do their techs fix your machine? When all else fails, they reboot to the factory default. That factory default's sitting on that other partition so that they can reload your machine. But we have found individuals who know that that exists and copy all their documents to that side of the partition. It's a great way to cover it up. Most people miss it. Okay, you can go ahead into the other document. So the next document that we're going to talk about is the chain of custody. You guys know chain of custody. You have to track everything about this information. My forensic analysts love and hate my e-discovery people, and certainly you guys, right? They're so trained at evidence and how to handle it that they do a chain of custody every time it moves. So I'll pick on Jill. Jill, you get a drive in, and you decide, I need you to have somebody look at it. You pick it up, and you hand it to somebody over here, right? Do you fill out a chain of custody to let them know that you went from you to you? You're supposed to. Supposed to, because technically if something goes wrong with that drive, was it you that screwed it up or was it you that screwed it up? It was Jill. We all know that, right? Chain of custody for forensics people is like the holy grail. So you will have forensics people that will refuse to give you a drive unless you fill one of these out, and your answer should always be, no problem. Take your time, fill it out, give it to me. Because later on when he sits on the stand, if you told him not to worry about the chain of custody, and the guy stands up and says, can you confirm without a doubt that the stuff that's in this review platform is what was on that drive? His first response will be, I can, up until the day this attorney didn't ask me to do a chain of custody. And he will hold that. Whether it's yours or somebody else's, you've got to keep track of chain of custody. Now, reasonably, even in our e-discovery firm, we have electronic chain of custodies internally. So when I give it to somebody in my shop, even in the next room, I can update the media tracker to say I gave it to somebody else. Most judges don't understand that level. Law enforcement, criminal cases, absolutely. But as long as you have a chain of custody from the forensic analyst to this firm and from this firm to someone else, you're usually fine. They're not as worried about the internal one. I make that as an example because it's an important one, but you can probably get away with it. As an election, now forget my collections group. As an electronic discovery vendor, you should never let me get away with taking your data without a chain of custody. You should never, ever do that. My guys are trained to ask for it all the time, fill it out, do all that stuff. They're not forensics people. They weren't trained like law enforcement. They forget, just like you guys forget. Don't let us do it. I don't care whether it's us or another provider. When you hand off a drive to somebody else, fill out a chain of custody form, send this form with the drive, and make sure you get a signed copy back. Because there was just a case with an electronic discovery vendor where they got sued by their own client because they wouldn't return data. The client said, we gave you that data. The vendor said, no, you didn't. I never got it. And they won because the law firm had signed a chain of custody over to them. Now, I happen to know from talking to individuals, I believe the drive went back to the law firm. I do. Problem is, what did the discovery vendor not do? No chain of custody. They just returned it to the client. They have no proof. They have no proof that it went back. Whichever way that lawsuit goes, you guys should always make sure you have a chain of custody going both ways. It's the most important thing you can do with evidence. It's no different than the argument I made about fingerprints on this. You wouldn't expect that as an investigator I would pick this up and go like this and clear it and hand it off to you and hand it back to you. You wouldn't do that because you understand we all understand I call it the CSI effect, right? We all understand criminal things. All of this evidence exists. Make sure you're tracking where it went, how long it went, when it was there, all of that stuff. That is the most important thing you can do, which is why we left it to the end. Can you flip back to the PowerPoint? So the last part of my presentation, I think, is just wrap up. You can keep going. Actually, I can take over. Yeah. All right. Let's open the floor up because obviously I've covered most of the information. This was about where unusual data exists. We covered a little bit broader than that because to me, whether it's on a computer, a laptop, the mobile phone, the cloud, the process is exactly the same. People get all mixed up when they start to get into the cloud and into mobile devices. They start to go, well, what's different? Nothing. Nothing is different. Different way of approaching it, different method, different concepts to get information, but don't throw out everything you learned when you get to the cloud devices or mobile phones. It's the number one thing I'm seeing is that because it's new and unknown, we're almost going back 15 years when lawyers were learning how to deal with computers that turned on, right? Mobile phones, cloud, same principles. Everything you learned about laptops and computers in the last 10 years, use that same knowledge. It doesn't change because of the unusual place. It's just a different method of collecting it. But other than that, it works exactly the same. Do you guys have questions? Wow, a quiet room. Question.
Wait. How often do you deal with issues related to people encrypting things? Like, did talk anything about that? Like, machines you get with evidence that's encrypted. What kind of issues have you seen surrounding that kind of thing?
So we have a couple of different things that are going on with encryption. And I think it got recorded, but I'll repeat it anyway. The question is how often have we dealt with encryption and encrypted items, and how do we deal with that? So a couple things to keep in mind. Lots of things get encrypted today. And the other thing is, unless they're really bad encryptors, that encryption is almost near impossible to get to. If I go down the street to the NSA, maybe I can get that information, right? But if they know enough to encrypt inside of a TrueCrypt file, if you guys have ever heard of TrueCrypt, it's free software now. You can download it. You can encrypt anything you want. It's a great tool. If they put the right encryption on it, I can't get to it. Unless I have the username and password, I can't get to it. You'll have forensic experts tell you, yeah, I can. There is a possibility. I'm telling you it will be cost prohibitive to try and do that. Like I said, and there are cases where it's absolutely essential, right? In that case, you send it to an NSA-like company that goes and breaks all kinds of encryption keys and all that kind of stuff. But in general practice, encryption you can't get to. What I have found is if I do forensic analysis, guess what all of us do with that encryption password? We email it to ourselves, we send it, we save it in a text file somewhere. You would be surprised how often we get through encryption that's phenomenally good with no effort whatsoever, right? Because how do we remember? I guarantee I can walk around the firm and I'll bet I'll find at least 10% of you that have your password stuck on your monitor, right? Because you don't remember what it was, so you stick it right up there. I always joked when I was a CIO and interviewing for jobs, the very first thing I ever did in a law firm is I went through the front door, past the receptionist, into the thing, sat down at a computer, looked around for the pad, logged in, printed out a document, went back to the lobby, and I sat down. And I said, okay, as a CIO, the first thing we're going to fix is I just took sensitive data from your law firm. That's a problem. We need to figure that out. Encryption, the number one way we beat it is human beings. Human beings. We all do it. We all do it. I have all total about 260 passwords in my head. I can't remember those forever, and I also have to be able to share those with somebody in case I get hit by a bus. How do I share them? You should share them in an encrypted file with one password that everybody knows. But more likely you're storing it on a file system somewhere. You text message, because, man, if we text message, that's not permanent. So we're going to text message the password. That's how we beat encryption. I just did a project where we had 8 different devices encrypted. It took us 1 day to break them all because the password for all 4 custodians with different encryption all used the exact same password.
In encrypted data that we collect from a client, you would ask the user for the password. If the user is no longer with the client, you would ask the client or the successor, do you know what user X's password, encryption password was? When I receive data from opposing counsel, I ask, have you provided me with an exceptions report that indicates any data in your collection that was encrypted that you're not providing to me because you couldn't review it yourself? So on our end, it's find a way to decrypt, and on the receiving end, it is make sure that you're aware of encrypted items that you may be missing out on so that you can follow up.
Yeah, and the way to ask for that from a provider or the other side, ask for an exception report, things they weren't able to review that were encrypted or password protected, and say, look, I don't need the file. Obviously, you can't get it, but can you give me the name of it? Because the other wonderful thing we do as human beings, when we encrypt something, man, that's really important to us. So we tell you exactly in the file name what it is. Okay, so just keep that in mind. That's part of the challenge. All the security in the world is never going to change human beings. Right? So no matter how much more complicated it gets, no matter how much more complex the password is, you're not going to get it. I get all my passwords from my network by going onto the internet and doing a random search and picking like the 5th word that comes out of the search criteria that I do, because it's not personal to me. I have no concept other than that's what I did. And how do I remember what my password is? I run the same search again. And it's the 5th word or the whatever, right? I can find it. But all of us, again, birthdays, kids' names. We have password crafting software for non-encrypted passwords. Like before Word 2007, any Word document that's password protected, 5 seconds. We can just unlock it. Excel, PowerPoint, anything older than 2007, those passwords weren't real. I mean, literally, I can pull them up in 5 seconds and run a password protector and give them to you. Windows computers, by the way, in case anybody wants to know this, I have a CD in my office that I can bring to your office, plug in, reboot the computer, and it clears the password. I don't care how long it is. Windows is not a secured computer. It's not. Physical security, all those things are important because I can put in a disk. So we've done that. Oh my God, I got a password protected document. I can't get in, the Windows thing. What are we going to do? Give me 1 second. CD, return, clear password. Log into Windows, get the information. How many of you have collected from the cloud or collected on one of your cases from mobile devices? Nobody. Is that because you're not asking for it? It hasn't come up? Anybody have? I mean, it's got to be part of your collection process now. Is it not being asked for?
I wanted to ask you a question about that. I would preface my question with a representation that we typically are not doing forensic collections. We're relying on our clients to produce data to us that may or may not be forensically sound. Some are very tech savvy and know what they need to do, and they're prepared for larger litigation. We do a forensic collection when we know the case is big.
Okay.
Class action, a high dollar case, we know to be that careful. But otherwise, we rely on our clients, and it's largely because our colleagues in the bar will will admit to the admissibility of this evidence. We'll just
Agree.
agree that it will come in. And it's largely because metadata doesn't typically matter in a civil case, though we know the risk that it can matter greatly.
Right.
But my question is, okay, on both sides, let's say, here's my hypothetical. My client owns a manufacturing facility, and there is an explosion. And a plaintiff who lives nearby claims to have been injured in their body and in their property from the explosion. And I suspect that my client's employees, have sent text messages relating to the explosion, and that the plaintiff himself has sent text messages relating to the explosion. So say we've gone through discovery or we're doing investigation, and I want to collect my client's employees' text message data from a relevant period, and opposing counsel says, you've sent me a request for production for my client's text message data. I have no idea how to do that. Can you help me out? How do we go about doing this?
So there's a couple ways that we've done that in a similar case. The answer is third-party neutral collections, right? So myself as Vail or Edith Atera become a third-party collection agent. We don't give that phone to you, and we give your phones to him, but you agree to hire one person to do the collection exactly the same. And then you give that data that way and that data that way. That way you know each of you is I sit on the stand at that point, or my forensic analyst, saying, we collected all this data from both sides. We used the same exact method for the mobile phones. This is what we did. Boom. It allows you to cover it.
So in the case of my employees, do I say, Todd from DC is coming in on Friday. I need all you key custodians to come to the conference room with your cell phones. He'll copy them, and then you can leave.
Yes.
That's all there is to it?
Yes. Bring the mobile phone. We have to know that in advance that we're going to be collecting mobile phones because we have to bring special devices to do that. But yes, as part of the planning of collection, what devices are we collecting from? Let us know that. We bring the right devices to collect mobile phones. They bring it to us. We've also had individuals give up their phone for a period of time. Most people won't do that today. But yeah, absolutely. It's exactly the same. I'm literally going to collect an image of the mobile phone. I'll take that image back, and now I can do all the analysis, the drives, the deleted files. I can give you your phone back. It's just a matter of collecting. Collection on a mobile phone, half the time, actually probably 10% of the time to collect a desktop because it only holds so much.
How long do you think?
That depends on the device. You don't want my iPhone, right? Because I've got probably about 40 gigs of data. It's going to take that long to collect. Most people have email, text messages. The biggest thing we collect, photos, large, but it can be any size. Most iPhones, to give you an idea, I just know the iPhones off the top of my head, usually they're 4 gigs, 8 gigs, or 16 gigs, or 32 now. That's the most you're going to collect. Most people don't fill their phones. The 32 gig one, 20 minutes, maybe, to image the phone and take it off. But it's that simple. It's plug the machine in, collect the mobile phone, get an image, then the image, just like a regular laptop image, is taken back to the lab for analysis.
What about if my plaintiff's phone has a SIM card in it? Can I just say, buy yourself a new SIM card and send me yours?
SIM card doesn't hold most of the data that you want. Text messages, the GPS locator, all that stuff is on the phone itself. The SIM card is just connection information and who they called. It'll have call history, all that stuff, but it's not just the SIM card. There's memory inside the device, which is where most of that stuff gets held. The other thing, talking about that, is also the small SMS cards where people add to put all their photos on. When you collect a mobile phone, you should also ask them, have they put a card in it to collect photos off of it before? Now, if they say no, I can go figure that out. I know there was a card plugged in at some point. But that's the other piece, is that card that's added to be able to allow more stuff, you want to ask them if they have that information as well.
Is there such a thing as a forensic collection from a cloud?
Yes, Facebook, and there's a product that we use called X1. X1 is a forensically accepted tool in the courts that goes and collects from almost all the things I talked about: Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, MySpace, all of those. The tool goes out, it registers where it collected from, when it collected, and gets all the metadata out of that tool. It's not as clean, as Emily can tell you. She had a case where they're trying to find a specific thing in Facebook. Not as easy as on a hard drive, right? Because it's not as organized.
Yeah, I just want to add about that. This is Emily. Facebook, interestingly, because that seems to be the big social media thing you might collect, the best collection you can get now is if a user self-collects and says to Facebook, please wrap up all of my data, send me an email when it's ready. That's the best, most organized way to get a Facebook account. The X1 forensic way where you maybe don't have access to the user to be able to do that. You get the data, but it doesn't come as organized as the Facebook does it for you. But you have to obviously have the cooperation of the Facebook user, because they send an email that authenticates that it's you, and then they correspond with you through your email to let you know when it's ready to be picked up.
Yes, except that you're not going to get any data from that public account that was deleted. Whereas with X1 and with the request, it'll pull data that's not visible even on the public site.
Talk about the economics. You've got the company doing it themselves, hard to defend in a courtroom, versus someone going on site and doing it in person, expensive.
Yep.
What's in between if you don't want to pay for someone to come on site?
The device, the ability to send a portable device that's pre-configured by our forensic analysts to plug into a workstation to gather the hard drive. The way that works is basically we set up scripts and all kinds of stuff on the device. The device is effectively forensically sealed so that we know whether somebody tampered with it, right? We send the device to the user. We tell them to plug it into their USB port in the back, and all of a sudden something runs on their machine, gathers up, it'll say done, and then you take the device out and send it back. That's the cheapest way to get a desktop and get information and gather a forensic image of the entire drive without having to send somebody out there. A couple problems with that. You have to be careful who you're asking to do that. If you ask the custodian themselves, they're going to plug it, and this is not in civil, more criminal we find this, or even civil where something went wrong, Enron being the famous example, right? Device was sent in Enron. The individual took the device, forensically sealed, walked over to his buddy's machine and plugged it in, copied that hard drive and sent it back. Famous thing, right? That's the only problem. You have no authorization. So what I suggest, you ship the device to legal counsel inside the corporation, have legal counsel take it to the machine, have that individual plug it in, make them watch, document the chain of custody, and send it back. That at least eliminates. That doesn't work with servers. It doesn't work with that stuff. There are devices now that are coming out, and we've used it in a couple of cases where even network servers, things like that, we can gather from a device at our location over the internet into the server. There's a couple problems. Legal at the corporation will love you. It's cheaper. The user will love you. No interruption. The IT people will love you. No problem. The security office will have a huge issue because somebody has to open up that port to let me in, and for that period of time, somebody else can come in as well. So you'll find that your security divisions inside of corporations are the biggest hindrance there. The other thing is on-site collection is a misnomer of expense, right? Most of the time when we do on-site collections, we do it on a per-device basis or a per-hour basis or a per-day basis, right? The expense is travel. That's the biggest expense. I'm going to send somebody from D.C. to West Virginia, or I'm going to send D.C. to California. What Etera has done, similar to my relationship with Emily, we go around the country. We partner with independent forensics experts that we have them go through evaluation, background checks with us, but they're their own provider. We find the individual in your city where your corporation is to go do that collection. All right, and that waives the travel cost. So if you're collecting 10 workstations, $2,500. That's the cost of on-site collection, $250 a drive on average. Now there's a couple hours here and there that might be added to that, but generally that's not expensive in the grand scheme of things. One of the biggest flaws I see when people talk about expense is let's save as much money up front, and then they get all the way to review, and then they spend hours and hours and hours reviewing data, and then the corporate client is going to come back and take a big sledgehammer and whack it over your head. Because the cheapest part of electronic discovery from start to finish is collection. The biggest collection I did was a 45 custodian collection this year with 2 servers, all that stuff, 20 grand. To a corporation, that's nothing. It's nothing. But if you don't collect the right data and have to go back 3 times to collect data, or you collect the wrong data, get all the way through review and realize, oh, I'm looking at the wrong data, that's where the expense is. On-site collection is not actually that expensive. It is to us. I always say, I was talking to a general counsel of a corporation, and I said, this is going to be really expensive, this collection. This is 6 years ago. And I'm sitting and I'm talking, I'm like, wow, and this was like 160 custodians. And I was like, oh my God, it's going to be like 100 grand. He looked at me and goes, I spend that yesterday, right? I spend that in a minute. The 100 grand's not my problem. It's the 1.2 million it's going to cost me in review of the data that I have a problem with. So just balance that. But we have options. I gave you all the hybrids, right? It's all the way from self-collection all the way to sending a device and collect.
Which reminds me that it can be defensible to have your key custodians identify where relevant data is, as long as you're having a good conversation with them about it. Can you do a limited, targeted collection?
Yes, as long as you're not looking for those other deleted files, anything like that. A targeted collection is fine. It's what we call a logical acquisition. Targeted collection, logical acquisition, same thing, right? It means I'm going to go in and only collect files that I can see. It's perfectly defensible as long as it's documented and how it was recovered and was there a custodial interview. And usually I recommend confirming with IT that individuals had access to that location. Make sure that it's valid. The one you're going to get with custodial interviews that I love, collect everything on my J drive. Because I did that 2 years ago, and it was on my J drive. Stop. As soon as they say J, X, Q, whatever letter, stop. Because what their J drive is today is, I can pretty much guarantee you, it wasn't their J drive 2 years ago. It was some other mapping. Ask them what folder they put it in on that drive, and then have IT verify that the J drive they're looking at, that folder exists. That's the better way to do it.
Are there any questions from the other offices?